to have you with us. I wish I could see you all, but I'm glad that you're here. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. Our topic tonight is healthy families and healthy boundaries, something we can all aspire to. This is what we used to look like. This was in the Horsham Community Center back in the day, pre-COVID. We're looking forward to that. And wanted to also thank our host and our funders. Hatboro-Horsham Educational Foundation has funded this program, and our longtime partner, Hatboro-Horsham School District. We've been working together for almost 11 years, which is amazing. So thank you, thank you. Love you guys so much. Just want to make sure that you know that you can submit questions at any time during the program. So you can use the chat feature, or you can use the Q&A. There's a little Q&A box you can find at the bottom of your screen or device. And just go ahead and hit that and ask any questions that you have as our presenters are speaking, or we'll save some time for sure at the end, like the last 20 minutes or so at least. We are recording this, but we can't see you. I mean, the recording can't see you. You won't be visible as a participant. Only the panelists will be visible. Same goes for your questions. They won't be recorded, but they'll be visible to us as panelists. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the follow-up page for this program is conversation.zone/parents. And Bob Lamb is with us. He's with Be a Part of the Conversation as our Director of Operations and Programs. He is going to be sharing some links in the chat for things like that follow-up page, as well as, oh, and then at the end of the program, you'll see a link pop up on your screen to take a survey. We really appreciate it if you take this survey. Even if you've taken our surveys before, it helps us so much to get your feedback about how this program was and what you'd like to hear from us in the future. So just to let you know a few things that are coming up in February. The first two programs I'm going to tell you about are funded by the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. And this first one is called Cannabis, Kids, and Solutions for Anxiety. This is coming up on February 8th. It will be also on Zoom. You can register there at convo.zone/anxiety. That is going to be a really interesting program. We'll have Patrick Dowling with us for that and some others. Also, we have on February 15th, The Trouble with Alcohol and Teens. That is on February 15th, and you can see the link for that. I'm going to have Bob share our calendar link, though. That's going to be the easiest place for you to find all of these programs. And then we have two more programs coming up with Hatboro-Horsham this spring. March 17th will be with Dr. Catherine Dalsgaard, who we've had with us previously. She's amazing. She's going to be talking about how we can, as parents, have positive strategies to help out with anxiety. We're talking a lot about anxiety. Has anybody noticed that? It's a real issue these days. So hope you'll join us for that. That will be a hybrid event. We have two separate links for that. There is an Eventbrite link. We're limiting that to only 25 seats because we don't know what COVID's going to be looking like in March. In fact, we have to be honest and say we may have to go for fully virtual, but for now, we're hoping for the best and are hoping for a hybrid option. And there is another link for if you just want to go ahead and register to join on Zoom. So those are both on our calendar as well. And then finally, on April 5th, working with Hatboro-Horsham again is Mike Blanche. He's going to be doing a talk about the tech life balance because our kids, unfortunately, maybe are having some challenges moderating their time with technology. And we know how important technology is to keep us connected and in some cases to keep our kids educated, but it is a tough balance sometimes. So Mike will be with us for that. And as I said, you can find all of this on our calendar. This is the important link for you guys to register for any of these programs, conversation.zone/calendar. I always love to remind folks that we have support group meetings that take place for any parents or caregivers or guardians who are concerned about a son or daughter, or their child who might be misusing substances, having problems with substance use. The parents and guardians who attend these meetings are all people like me. I have a son who today is in recovery, but we're all parents who've been down this road. Most of these programs are taking place on Zoom. This is the calendar on this page for parent partnership. The green buttons are all Zoom meetings. There are a couple of in-person ones that you find in purple, and then there's one hybrid. But we really need each other as parents going through this stuff. So I encourage you to visit this page and learn more about how we can support you. So our panelists tonight, we have two main presenters. You're going to first hear from Lizzie Lopez, who is a therapist with Ethos Treatment. And then you'll hear from Pam Williams, who hopefully many of you know if you're joining us from Hatboro-Horsham. She's a guidance counselor at the high school. And we'll also have with us to field any other questions, Dawn Tucker, who is an administrator with the district. She's the coordinator of special services, K through 12. And Bob Lamb, as I said, is also with us, and I'll be here too. Bob and I will be moderating and checking your questions as we go on. So I'll stop sharing and have Lizzie introduce herself and share your screen and get us started. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, first I just want to thank Kim and everybody that be a part of the conversation. I think it's a great organization and I'm always happy to speak. Second, I want to just say, like anybody that's attending this programming, I'm already impressed. It's really hard to carve out time right now with everything going on. So I think if you're using this resource, that means that you want to have more effective parenting skills and figure out how to navigate a lot of the stressors that's going on. We were just talking before this started, just kind of about what we're seeing on every end with adolescent care right now. And there's a lot of different challenges that we're seeing. So we were joking about, it takes a village, but the more people that you can get involved, the more resources that you can use, generally, the better this fares in regards to supporting whoever, the person is that's struggling, whether it's the adolescent, the young adult, or whoever. So I am going to share my screen to give you guys a PowerPoint. So you have a visual kind of some of the talking points that I'm going to hit. So basically tonight we're going to talk about healthy boundaries. And is this on? Here we go. There we go. Is that full screen?
But you're not in presenter. You're not actually presenting it yet. So go to slideshow.
Okay.
There you go. And then play from the start. There you go.
Okay. There Perfect. We go. All right. Thanks, Kim. So yeah, so first I'm going to kind of hit on some effective parenting skills. So kind of when we talk about parenting, it is a mix of a lot of different things that sort of one feeds the other, right? So I really like to talk about principles and sort of guiding things that you can use to then inform your boundaries. And a lot of times this is looking at like your own value systems, your own structure, your own self-care. And so one of the first things I always do when I talk to parents, when I'm treating an adolescent or a young adult, is I really talk about modeling the behavior you want to see. It is really hard to get a young person to invest in caring for their own mental health if people in the family system that are at the top, right, the parents, are not investing in their own mental health. So that looks like a lot of different things. It looks like self-care. It can look like your own therapy. It can look like exercise. It can look like nutrition. It's just any of these things that really develop a healthy lifestyle. But it can also look like communication patterns, different aspects like that. So like sometimes when I see a really reactive teen, I immediately think like, is there a reactive parent here that when communication breakdown occurs, both people explode and then we're creating a fire? So one of the best things I think you can do is really take an assessment of yourself, which is not always easy because that would mean you would have to be honest with yourself and really ask yourself, like, how am I doing? What am I presenting to my child? Am I a role model for the things that I'm telling them are important? Like, am I doing the things that I'm telling them to do? Because as so many people know, one of the most effective strategies is to lead by example, which really means looking at your own behaviors, choices, and all of that kind of stuff. Because a lot of times that's what adolescents and young adults key in on. And I get a lot of adolescents that are in my office and they're saying, well, like, I don't know why I should do this. Mom and dad don't do this, right? Or they say like, I need to be in therapy, but then they won't seek therapy themselves. And so a lot of times it's like, if you're doing anything contradictory, you're kind of working against the grain. So you're not really effective. You're not as effective as you could be. So first, I always like want to hit on modeling. The second thing I always tell people is allow space for failure. So I'm seeing a lot of parenting on the extremes. I don't know if the school professionals would say the same, but it's like I'm either seeing like extreme control, extreme helicopter, or I'm seeing like extreme passivity, and the kid is kind of doing whatever they want, and and they have a lot of power. I guess that's the best way to say it. So allowing for space for failure is extremely important, because developmentally they're going to fail, and that's where they can learn things. But the boundaries come into play with how you support a person when that occurs. Do you try to fix things? Do you try to support them? Do you access resources, or do you try to save them? Do you try to enable? Are you paying attention when a failure occurs, or are you just turning a blind eye? So allowing this space for failure is really important, but then kind of learning what to do after it occurs and navigating it successfully is the second part that's just as important. In line with this is like being aware, being patient, and being empathetic, right? You don't really get anywhere in relationships, which when we talk about boundaries, those are the negotiating terms for relationships, if you don't live in line with some patience and some empathy. You need to learn how to put yourself in your adolescent shoes, which is hard because you're not an adolescent anymore, right? But a lot of things are developmentally normal, and it doesn't make the kid bad or good. It's just kind of what we're seeing. And especially right now, given everything with the pandemic and the heightened anxiety, as Kim pointed out, and just the specific challenges we're facing, empathy can go a long way. Right. And empathy doesn't say that it is okay. It doesn't say that they don't need to do anything. It just says that you're trying to understand where they're coming from. You're trying to really understand the behavior that's going on, because maybe the avoidant behaviors is tied to anxiety. It's not just like they're not trying to go to school. So then getting them access to mental health care for the anxiety would be the appropriate step, not just trying to figure out how to force them there. But being patient with the process as well, and being patient with yourself as a parent. None of this stuff we're going to talk about tonight is like a one-trick pony. So it's not like you're going to walk away with the cure-all. You're going to do it once, and the family system is going to completely change, and all the problems that you were having are going to go away. You need to be patient. It is a process, and change requires reinforcement, and boundaries require reinforcement. So being aware of all of those things are really important, and being aware of what's going on with your kid, honestly. And one way to do that is like really communication. So communication across the board is really important. It's important with boundaries. It's just important for success. So whether that's communication with the school, communication with your child, communication with any providers, communication with doctors, anytime we see an increase in communication, generally things fare a lot better. So in line with that, right, if you're doing those things, you can appropriately provide the structure, support, and encouragement they need. If you're not aware of what's going on, it's really hard to do any of these things. And you might be trying to do these things, but you're not as effective as you could be, right? You're not providing the support that they need. You're not providing structure in the most effective way. And then you might not be encouraging the things that you need to encourage, or you might just not be seeing it all together. And all of this goes hand in hand with boundaries, because without these values, right, these values as guiding principles, it's really hard to have healthy boundaries, because boundaries negotiate the space between somebody's rights and needs and the other person's rights and needs. So a lot of these things are value-based. A couple like notes for parents from what I'm seeing in regards to some of these polarizing parenting techniques. Is sort of like be dispassionate. And that doesn't mean you don't want to be like passionate about what your kid's doing, but kind of like try to like land somewhere in the middle, right? Like we don't want to see the extremes. We don't want to see the extremes with boundaries. We don't want to see really passive boundaries or really rigid boundaries. We don't want to see the real controlling and helicopter parenting or the real passive parenting. So in order to kind of fall somewhere in the middle on all of these spectrums, it's important to kind of be dispassionate. So that means like you're not a false cheerleader, right? Like you're not telling your kid that they're going to be great at everything and life is going to be like rainbows and butterflies and all those things. Like you adequately prepare them for life and for their failures and talk to them about it, how it's necessary, right? And like this is a part of life and these are good lessons to learn. And this is how you build resiliency. You also don't catastrophize failure. So I see a lot of parents when when the news comes in, like in a session, when I do a family session, and we're discussing something that the parent's not going to want to hear, like that they're using marijuana again. I see a lot of parents become very reactive and they catastrophize everything. Like, oh my gosh, their life's over. They're never going to get into college, whatever these things that people say in these moments. But recognizing that that can be very harmful in regards to getting the message across that failure is bad. And failure is not bad. Failure is a place for growth, and it can create teachable moments. And that's really important to convey in your messaging to your kids, and your messaging that reinforces these boundaries. So the best thing you can do is really focus on efforts, not results. So really look at like, what are the actions being taken? What is the person doing? Not every kid you see is going to be a straight A student. Like, that's okay. Right. But if you're always focusing on the fact that they got the 1B, you're going to miss all the good stuff that they're doing. Right. So focusing on efforts and not results really allows you to not catastrophize failure, and also not be a false cheerleader. And this kind of gets into the next thing that I see a lot of parents do, and we do it as human beings. So this is just not parenting, right? But we have confirmation bias. So what we believe is true, then we seek supporting information to support that. And in the parenting realm of things, this is really called negative tracking. And what happens is it's bad for the good kid, because if you label your kid a good kid and all you look for is the facts that support that they're good, when they do fail, it's like a huge disappointment. You're really deflated. You cannot believe this happened. You're very defeated, right? But it's really bad for the bad kid as well, because if it's a bad kid, you're always looking for the things that they're not doing the right way. And it ends up generating a lot of criticism and low self-esteem. So as parents, to kind of really try to step back and ask yourself how you see your kid, and is it accurate, right? Because you're biased. We're all biased towards our kid, is a really important thing to do, to see if you have all the information. And so this is why it's really important when we're talking about stuff like boundaries, to solicit information from other people, right? We see things as we are, and therefore we miss a lot of stuff. So listening to the school, if the school is calling and telling you something about your child, like to be concerned about, like listening to the school, listening to mental health providers, listening to doctors, because those are information points where you can really start to have more of an objective outlook about what's going on. And so many times I think like we get really pigeonholed and put our blinders on and see things a certain way, when really there's like a lot of stuff that we're missing. So this gets into boundaries, because really, like, and in order to have all those things going on, right, you really got to look at like, how does this relationship function? And the way relationships function are through boundaries, right? So Kim gave me this quote, and it's a great quote, right? But they're the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously, right? So it's like, boundaries are your rights and needs as a person. And what boundaries do, healthy boundaries, right? They state your rights and needs while respecting another person's rights or needs. This does not mean that the other person is going to like it. This does not mean that your teenager is going to like it when you have boundaries. In fact, usually it's the opposite. But it's a good thing, because they actually convey that you care about somebody and you care about yourself as well. And that's an important thing to model, right? So these are the terms of the relationship that guide how you interact with each other. So a lot of times when I see poor boundaries, like porous boundaries, unhealthy boundaries, whatever you want to deem it, the kid has a lot of power. So they're steamrolling everybody, right? And the parents are not asserting sort of like how this impacts them and how it impacts the household. And the problem is, when you don't have healthy boundaries and you have multiple kids in the household, and one is creating a lot of chaos and they're not having this structure and this guidance, the other kids will suffer as well. So it's really important to have these guiding terms, because everybody in the household matters, right? The adolescent matters, any other siblings, and the parents, right? And a lot of times I think a lot of people get lost because there's specific challenges that are developmentally normal in adolescence. They're going to test boundaries. That's absolutely normal. Generally, they're very reactive when they don't like the boundary. That's developmentally normal, because if we think of brain development, their emotional reasoning, it's not there yet, right? Their prefrontal cortex has not fully developed. So they are more reactive and impulsive in general. Every kid that's, not 25 yet, basically. It's important to realize that like boundaries exist on a spectrum. So I think a lot of times we get very like black and white and rigid with things. They're ever evolving and they're ever changing. It's not one way and it has to be that set way forever, right? I mean, if you think of the pandemic, a lot of people have had to change their boundaries and negotiate it because what we're experiencing now is not what we were experiencing 3 years ago. And so the changes that have occurred have had to impact relationships, which then need to impact the boundaries in order for the relationships to operate on a healthy level. There's developmental appropriate boundaries. A lot of times I see adolescents with way too much freedom and way too much control. So they're allowed to do things that are not developmentally like normal. And if they do those, it'll probably be destructive because, like I said, they don't have the decision-making capability yet because developmentally they're just not there. They need appropriate levels of choice. And that's how boundaries guide what is appropriate and what their choices can be. Boundaries are clear and concise, and they're conveyed with assertiveness and compassion. So assertiveness skills are really important. Communication, as I touched on earlier, right? Like talking to your kids about what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, what you're willing to tolerate. Like those are really important discussions to have. So things just don't get really chaotic and dysfunctional. Sometimes, right, the boundaries really need to be defined, right? Like I am not okay with this, right? This is causing X, Y, Z. This is not what I'm willing to tolerate. Sometimes they just need to be lived. So my best example of that is there's absolutely like a crisis that can occur, right? But a lot of times I get adolescents that are very reactive when there's a crisis, but it's not really a crisis, right? But they deem it appropriate. So they call their parents and they say like, I need X, Y, and Z. Like I need this now, right? Like I need to leave school. My anxiety is like super amplified, right? Can you pick me up? Can you call and write a note? And the parent immediately comes and picks up the kid and takes them out. And what happens is inadvertently, you're reinforcing the anxiety, right? You're removing them from the situation instead of them developing effective coping strategies. So a lot of times when I say it needs to be lived, it's like if your kid calls you and it's not an emergency, right? It's just like things are elevated. Give them a minute. Give them 10 minutes. See if in 10 minutes the situation has changed or their crisis is not a crisis anymore. Don't rush in, right? So a lot of times, like it's a design for living too, right? And that's why it's very value-based. That's why boundaries are very value-based. I said before, it's totally developmentally normal for adolescents to challenge boundaries. Know that that's going to come. They're supposed to do that. It's actually healthy for them to do that, right? Because this is the stage where they're trying to fight for more independence. So just because the challenging is going on doesn't mean the boundaries aren't working. There's just different aspects to boundary setting. There's the actual boundary, and then there's the reinforcement of the boundary. And it would be really nice if you could just set the boundary and then it would be done, but that's not how life works. So a lot of times in a lot of different relationships, it requires reinforcement, repetition, consistency, all of these things that create lasting change. And I'm going to end with this, and then I'll pass it off to Pam, I believe. But like, boundaries are not about making your child happy. Right. That's not what this is about. It's about like instilling the knowledge to them about like emotional limits and what's okay and not okay in relationships. So like, if you don't effectively have healthy boundaries, it's really hard for your adolescent, young adult to launch and have healthy, effective relationships, because when somebody comes in and tries to have healthy boundaries with them, they're not going to know what that is. And they're going to become very reactive to that. So this is a lot about teaching them how you engage with another person, what's acceptable, what's not, and how can you be a member of the household, right? And not how can you do whatever you want and everything, and us all pick up the pieces or constantly walk on eggshells or whatever it is. It's how can you actually be a part of. And so if a lot of this is confusing or you feel like, this isn't going on, I don't know what's happening, like there's a lot of resources available. I'm seeing a lot of people not accessing the resources that are there. right? So if you need more help, seek more help. Whether it's counseling, there's so many parent support groups now. And, I know we don't love things being online, but you can join support groups in a different state now. So there's a lot of parent support groups, a lot of good feedback. There's a lot of good supports at school. And if the more people you can get on board and the more communication that can occur between all of those different providers, once again, usually the better success we have. So I'm going to end with that, and then I'm going to pass off to Pam. Once again, I'm real appreciative of you guys inviting me to be here.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. That was great. Thank you. Okay, Pam, you're up.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do I need to do anything different? Is this good?
Good.
Okay. Thanks, Lizzie. That was awesome. And I think really covers so much of it. A couple things though that I just want to touch upon, and again, is the school piece. From the beginning this year, it's a very different year. It's hard. It's hard that we're coming in, rolling off of COVID and rolling off of a situation where I think that many students were home or they were virtual. And again, when Lizzie was talking about the control and the power, there was a lot. I mean, at that point, was an issue, again, of students had the opportunity of whether or not they put their camera on or how much they engaged. And now being back in the school, it's tough because we're going back to a world that they haven't been used to. And I do think when you say like developmentally appropriate or developmental milestones, we have students who may have, when COVID hit, was in 8th grade. And now they're jump up, after being home, and they're in the high school and they miss those opportunities or those growth periods, or maybe even the teachings of the teacher saying like, well, this is what would be expected at high school, or this is how, things are going to be different. So again, it's a tough situation. And I think that, we're seeing all the things that the parents are seeing, but we're trying to tease out what is the anxiety, what is the depression, what is making a crisis out of something that's not a crisis. We've also seen, again, like an increase in drug use, or at least sniffing out the opportunities of what's out there. So I think communication is huge. I know that as a guidance counselor, I really value when a parent does communicate, and I try my best too, as well as to reach at home. But I do think in a separate conversation I had with Kim, I think that sometimes some parents are nervous about disclosing or nervous about saying something for fear that then the student's going to get in trouble. But I really think that, there's 24 hours in the day. So there's a big portion for us as educators that parents are seeing behaviors or overhearing things or having students disclose to them things that are going on. And the same piece at school, they're living a whole nother life there as well. So I think that sometimes that really helps us to understand some of the behaviors that we're seeing at school. One of the things, like I was saying, is, we see a lot of wandering and things at school, going to the bathroom and maybe taking a little bit longer. But again, trying to tease out of whether that is avoiding the class, is that trying to meet up with friends, those kind of things that I think that it's really important as parents that if you have an idea of something that might be going on, or you're seeing things at home, anything that you can share, I think we need to find a way to get back to that place where we're all on the same page. And again, like Lizzie said, we're the village, like we're all, again, have our eyes open and we're seeing things. I think it's so important that Lizzie made the comment too, of just, keeping an open mind and listening when a professional from school calls you and tells you what they're seeing. Don't feel so much defensive that they're accusing something, or, you know what I mean? Really, when I call from school, I'm just trying to report what I'm seeing, and I'm trying to connect the dots of like, is there something going on? Is there something that we can help with? And I think that's something you'll hear over and over again. We're always trying to say at the school, like, how can we help? We're trying to figure out how we can take the services that we have and make it better. I don't think, again, parents are necessarily taking advantage of all the supports that we do have, between Dawn Tucker on here with the SAP services and the check-ins and the groups that we have going on, but we also have the counseling staff there. That's also, open to help. And again, we would all, pitch in with trying to connect to resources, that you could also use outside of the community. With that being said, I also think it's really important that when you do get support outside and in the community, whether it's a therapist or a partial program or things like that, allowing us all to communicate and talk is huge, because we all own a piece of it. And that's another piece that I've just seen too. I've seen, a real increase in seeking services. I think that's like right now, the mental health field is really flooded. And for some people, I know if you're out there trying to get counseling, it's tough. It's tough getting your kids in programs and finding therapists. But when you do, it's really important to listen to those professionals as well and listen to what they're seeing and what their suggestions are, and opening up the communication for back at school, because then that really helps us to have an idea of what the students were working on, what are the coping strategies that they were given, as well as being able to take a look at our programming and do we need to modify anything or put in any type of accommodations and whatnot. So that's really important, because I've seen more and more students that have disappeared for a while, and I know they're seeking services, but then they end up just showing up. And we like to try and have a meeting or try at least to have a game plan moving forward of how to support them. So I hope that makes sense as well. I'm trying to think some other things that Lizzie said. I think she's so on point with all of that. It's just really important that we all, I think, just connect with one another. And again, the communication, and reaching out and making sure that people know. I've also said a lot of times with students too, as they're, going through different issues, is also connecting with their teachers and making sure that they're also, again, you disclose what you want to disclose, but making sure that with the schoolwork, I've seen that as a big piece, that we're trying to get them back in school and get them back, on target with their classes. And it does take a village. It's everybody. But we definitely are here to support and really welcome anybody for questions, or again, I think this program is great because it gives another outlet to get support and to hear from other people as well.
Thank you, Pam. Dawn, do you have anything that you want to share at this point? I have some thoughts, but I want to turn it over to you first if you have anything, if you wanted to add.
Pam mentioned our student assistance program, so I wanted to just share for that. It is a public and a statewide program that is available within all schools. So it varies from school to school. So if you're outside of our district, there should be a program in Pennsylvania if you're in school. But in our building at the high school, we offer support groups. We have check-ins. This also occurs at our elementary and middle school levels. We also just have, a lot of our groups run stress, anxiety, anger management, family dynamics. These are not therapy groups. They are psychoeducational. So it's about finding other peers who are going through similar situations and realizing that you're not alone. And that's been a huge thing for kids to realize, I'm not the only one who's going through this. So I just the other day had a parent convinced her child to come into the office. They stopped in. We had a great conversation. I was able to connect to home. And again, Pam and Lizzie both shared that connection piece is the biggest part of everything right now, especially with those waiting lists, trying to get into mental health professionals and finding services and working through your insurance, and the longer wait list than we've ever seen in the system right now. It has been really challenging. So again, that communication, working together. I saw a comment, someone said, the counseling staff at the high school have been amazing, and while you're waiting for those wait lists, having other people to talk to, letting us know what's going on at the school day, and having that ability to communicate. Students who are coming back from placement or have been in treatment, it's a big transition to be out of a building and then trying to come back in and just get right back into routine. I mean, we're feeling stressed when you left, and then these two students are coming in, so they're feeling even more pressure and more stress. So it helps us to be able to communicate whatever their treatment plans are, talk about what resources are in the building. And we have the ability to be creative, which is really important. And I think that you'll find that at most schools, reaching out and connecting with people, because really it is about how do we help the students perform? How do we help them to, meet their goals and be successful? Really, we're about the education, but guiding them along the way and getting the supports in place that they need. While at the same time, I think it was really important, going back to this, was developmentally appropriate, right? Like, our job is to be the adults, to help to guide, So when you're feeling the pressure as a parent or an educator or at home where you're walking on eggshells, things are difficult and you really feel like you're under the pressure and needing to give in to anything. And maybe it's because you're fearful. So if your child is expressing things of self-harm, suicidal ideation, drug use, because they're self-diagnosing and treating their own anxiety that they've also diagnosed, right? Like, how do we support that? And when is it time to get a professional? And if that is the case, when you're feeling, that the control is completely in their court and you're worried, and rightly so, because these can be real crisis situations that we're dealing with, bring the team and see what supports are available. There are definitely community resources. Mobile crisis is one that we've used at the high school. We use a lot of our emergency rooms, Doylestown adding the hospital emergency rooms, have helped families get the supports when they're in immediate crisis. So we kind of run the gamut of, feeling distress and anxiety to dealing with the crisis situations. We deal with that every day at school. We certainly seen an increase, with students who are coming back, and that real struggle to also socially interact with their peers that they have not had to see face to face for quite some time. So that has certainly been a challenge. So, communication is key, and it does take a team.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see the thing about somebody said about the counseling staff being helpful. And that's the thing. Everybody has a job. Mom and dads, you have a job. You got to go to work. You have to earn your money. Your students have a job. They have to come to school. They're supposed to earn their credits. And same thing, we have a job, and our job is to help to get them in that building. So I feel like anything that's going on at home, don't hesitate to ask, because just like Dawn just said, I think so many times people feel like it's only happening to them or they're the only ones seeing it. And I mean, there's times when I've had students that come in and they're saying like, on Sunday night, I have a lump in my throat and, I'm nervous about Monday morning. Well, there's plenty of Sunday nights that I have a lump in my throat and I'm nervous about Monday morning. So I said, it's not just students, it's teachers, it's administration. This is a tough world that we live in. I mean, the nurse's office, you name it. It's not, it's not normal. But I feel like if you could just, at least as a parent, tell us what's going on, that helps us. And if a student's having a hard time about coming in the morning, and that's what we're seeing a lot of that, just being habitually late to school. And again, Lizzie touched on that too. I think sometimes as parents, you've been at home fighting with them. It's like you're done fighting. So you feel like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't get them up. But I do think it's important that every day you're trying to get them up. You're reminding them about, again, goals. What are their plans? How are we going to get there? Because right now I feel like a lot of teenagers are just living in today and aren't connecting again, until you start saying, well, what do you want to do after high school? Or where do you want to be? Because it does. All this builds upon itself. But you definitely let us know, because then that's where we can come in to kind of help and also figure a way of if we can get them in the building, that's a step. That's a step. Then we work on getting at class. But we can't do anything if we can't get them in that building. So that part, but definitely let us know. I think too, like a lot of parents have fallen into just calling them out sick. And then we have no idea why they're not coming in. And so again, like I touched upon before, not so worrying about, like, the school is not looking to get you in trouble. The school is not looking to punish. We're not. We're just trying to figure out why is there this disconnect, or why is there a problem, or why is there the long lists of absences. We just want to have an idea and try and work with it. So again, I'm thankful that somebody made the comment about that, because I hope so, because I feel like that's what we're really, really trying to do. And we appreciate and understand that, even when we say, we think that you need services beyond us, or you need services outside of the school, we understand that that could be easily a 6-month wait. But even more so than why I'll connect with Dawn's office of SAP, and we will work together, to figure out what can we do to get you to that 6-month point. What can we do the best that we can to offer you some support through the school?
That's
when
great.
we talked, I wanted to say one comment, Kim, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
When we
please.
talk about healthy families, one of the reasons why opening up the lines of communication is so important, because there's this dynamic that occurs, and I'm sure every parent, and here, if you live in a 2-parent household, can relate to this, called splitting. So what people do is they go to the person where they think they can get what they want out of, right? And they'll tell one person one thing and tell another person another thing. And we see kids do it with parents, but kids also do it with providers. So what happens is when the lines of communication aren't opened up, the kid will be telling the guidance counselor one thing at school, and then will come to therapy and tell me something else. And then we'll tell a parent a third thing. And before you know it, nobody knows what's actually going on. And everybody has pieces of information and none of it's lining up. So when we talk about like just transparency and all on the same page, it's really important for a healthy family dynamic for the parents to be on the same page, but it's also really healthy for providers to be on the same page as well. So I just want to make that comment because it made me think of that when I have all that going on in a family system.
That is such an important point. I'm so glad you said that, Lizzie. Thank you. There are some great questions coming in. Thank you. And please go ahead and continue to submit those, folks. Here's a question. It's a really good one. What advice would you give to parents of a teen who is using weed often regarding privacy boundaries? And let me just say to this parent and anyone else who's feeling the same kind of thing, you are not alone. I was on the phone with 2 different families today who are really struggling with this, and they both have young kids. One woman has 4 kids under 19 who are all smoking a lot of cannabis. And her question was, how do I know when to be worried? And so anyway, she's not on the call tonight. So I spent a lot of time talking with her, but please, for this one, how do you handle privacy boundaries in that kind of situation?
I can take that if you want, since I do substance use. That's so my specialty is substance use treatment. I would say that, negotiating terms of privacy really has to deal with trust in a relationship. However, I'm not also a big fan of people just constantly going through every piece of information that they can. I see a lot of parents constantly go through kids' phones in a way that's very invasive. And then the kid has no space to reach out for help to another peer because they don't want the parent to read the text message. So it's really hard because once again, it's the spectrum thing, but I think privacy gets into accountability. So how is the kid accountable to not be using? And are there measures of accountability? Because then the terms of privacy can be negotiated a little bit different. When there's no accountability, generally what I see is an overreach on privacy because there's so much anxiety and fear that the parent's always feeling like they have to do all this checking to make sure that the thing's not happening. And generally the thing is still happening. So it's really trying to up the level of accountability and whatever that looks like, right? Could be regular drug testing. It could be get them in some drug and alcohol counseling, right? To address the substance use. And if the measures of accountability are in place, then the terms of privacy can be negotiated based on what's going on and the current relationship, because I do think there needs to be privacy, but what that looks like really varies on what is the kid actually engaging in, and how do you know what they're engaging in, right? So if we're talking about marijuana use, well, are they allowed to have privacy, or are they in their room hitting a THC vape pen every hour on the hour because there's not a measure of accountability to make sure that's not going on? So knowing sort of what is appropriate depends on the scenario, and really, in my opinion, largely depends upon what are the measures of accountability in place, which once again ties back to boundaries, because it always ties back to boundaries. So yeah.
Thanks, Lizzie. Anyone else have any comments on that? I always think when it comes to trust your kids to be kids, trust your kids to make mistakes. They're not going to be perfect no matter how great their grades are and how nice their friends are. They're going to make mistakes. And I think that when our kids say oh, you don't trust me. Well, I love you. And this is not about trust. This is about love. And I'm your caregiver, until you're of a certain age, I am your caregiver. So that's where the some of those boundaries can be challenging. I know.
I do want to say too, when we were talking about, Lizzie was talking about modeling the behavior and whatnot, is also as a parent, what are the messages that you put out regarding, weed and smoking and all of these things. And, we can see a difference in students and just of what, parents tolerate and what they allow, things like that as well. But I do also think there's times that eyes and ears, like sometimes when I do call home to say that I've seen a change in behavior or groups that they hang out with or things, you know what I mean? Things that you see going on at school. Again, I really encourage you to just listen to what is being said. You know what I mean? And the same token that I've had people call to say, I think they're wandering, and this is what I think they are looking for these things. I think they're seeking out people to buy off of. And again, it doesn't mean the school isn't going into, bringing the, and searching and whatnot. But like I said, like, let's me to do more investigating, to ask teachers, are people, asking to use the restroom a lot? Are they taking too long? Are they seen in hallways that they don't have a classroom in? So like I said, like some of this stuff, maybe with communication, we can also fit some of the puzzle pieces together.
Awesome. Thanks, Pam. So someone commented that they agree with that communication is important. Any suggestions on how to get an introvert to talk and feel comfortable to talk?
I'll take that one for a couple examples. The old saying, while you're driving in the car is the best place to have a conversation with your child, or because you're not making eye contact, you're not forced to look at each other. But also with this day, just kind of meeting kids where they're at. Is it writing something down? Is it through texting? Is social media, is there a different way for you to communicate and maybe talk about it later? Can you write it down and let me know, what you're struggling with, and we can come and talk to it. My mind.
Yeah, it's a little tough to hear you. You're a little echoey or something's happening, but I think we caught that. Thank you. And you said something about writing it down, and I know that can be a really effective strategy. I know one family who their therapist recommended that what they do is just have a pad of paper out and write a note that says, for mom or dad or whatever parent, to write a note that says, tell me one thing that was great about yesterday, and then just leave it there. And then you can kind of build from that and kind of go into some deeper stuff eventually, but just to sort of start that practice of writing notes to each other like that, just on a piece of paper, like old school, sometimes can be really kind of nice. Thank you, Dawn. All right. And someone asked, Dawn, this is for you too, what's the name of the program that Ms. Tucker is with? I'm in Wissahickon and don't have this programming available for my son. If you're talking about student assistance programs, Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, but every public school district in the state of Pennsylvania is, I believe, required to have a student assistance program. Is that right?
And that's perfect. How's my mic? There? No?
I mean, we hear you. It's just kind of speak nice and clear and slow.
Is that any better?
A little better.
Okay. So student assistance program, I actually went on a Wissahickons website, and if you search it, it comes up. Now, I would suggest starting with your school guidance counselor, asking them what services are available. Each program in each school district will look slightly different. We have a pretty good program in Hatboro-Horsham. We work really closely with Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol, Office of Mental Health, and each county offers different funds. So we're able to have SAP counselors in our buildings at elementary, middle, and high school. They facilitate some of our small groups and some of our screening opportunities through the student assistance program. So again, each district, each building will look slightly different, but start with the counselor. That's the best person to ask. They'll know what programs are available. They'll know what services are available through the program and what resources they're in connection with. Is that clear?
Great, thank you. And please, folks, go ahead and keep on asking some questions. We'd love to hear from you. We did have a couple of questions that came in ahead of time. So one was, what suggestions do you have as you transition from your child into emerging as an adult? So that, and maybe Lizzie, you know something about this, but the emerging adult I know has kind of shifted, hasn't it? What is traditionally been seen as adolescence. We all look at 18 as like the goal line, right? That's, they're an adult, and 18 is when they're going to launch or leave the nest or whatever. But isn't it true that clinicians are seeing that the age of that emerging adult is kind of shifting to an older age? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm sure with the pandemic, we're going to see even more of kind of a delay, just because we know as providers and as educational professionals, there's kind of a delay all across the board. So yeah, I think a lot of people are now taking gap years, or maybe starting at like a community college, right? Rather than just jumping maybe to the 4-year university. But I do think, yeah, we're looking at, I mean, because most people know like 18-year-olds, most 18-year-olds, like there still needs to be quite a bit of growth in order to be successful there. So yeah, emerging adult, I think is probably a little later than the standard 18 that you've heard in past years.
And what about how to help that transition along? How do we, and Lizzie has and Pam have both participated in our Preparing Your Child to Launch program. It's really what this is about. So how can we foster that independence and that self-advocacy?
Yeah. I think you have to know your child. First, I think you got to be like honest with yourself about like what they actually need. I think a lot of times we have like expectations that don't fit the reality of the situation. So really ask yourself, like, is your kid ready to go away? Like, is it going to be like a disaster? And you know that because they don't have the life skills to make it successful. Because a lot of times when we talk about preparing to launch, it's not just like, are they a good student? That's not like the only qualifier here. And so a lot of times I tell parents, like, start small with some of these like life skill stuff. Like when I get an adolescent, like I really try to cut the chain of like the parent doing the scheduling and the parent always communicating with me. Like I really try to get them to kind of own their own therapy. And of course, loop the parent in if they're like the transportation, but really try to teach them those skills. Like you're going to need to learn how to like schedule a doctor's appointment. You know what I mean? And it sounds simple, but really if you kind of start with the basics, a lot of the life skills develop from there. And then they have more of a foundation to be successful and do all the areas of life that they need to do instead of just school. You know what I mean?
I think this is also, and again, I have a 15 and a 17-year-old, so I'm learning this lesson as well. But I think as parents that you have this idea or this dream of what you think your kid's going to do or what it's supposed to look like. And if more than ever, this is the time that as a parent, you need to put on your listening ears and listen to what your kids are saying. And Liz, you're absolutely right. We're seeing a higher number of students that are going to community college or are taking even like senior year, maybe a reduced schedule and are dabbling with some community college classes to test out the waters to see how they're doing. And I think that these are great opportunities as well as, Monco has different certificate programs. So again, less than a year and having a skill. I think that need to listen to the fact that maybe they don't know what they want to do or they want to explore options or they're just not ready for the moving away. And I do think it's still scary. I do have some students that say, I really am not interested right now in a 4-year program because we still don't know what's going on with COVID or we don't know if the schools can be fully open. And we're talking about a huge investment financially. So I do think if ever is listening to where your kids are. And again, just trying to give them the experiences. It might be a matter of a job or, just where are they at and what is the next step to test out the next level of independence and not feeling like you have to jump in with 2 feet, but that there's a lot of in between things. But definitely we see the community colleges has become huge this year.
I love community college. It is such a valuable resource. It really, really is. And someone has said that ECAT has been phenomenal too.
Oh yeah, the technical school. And again, even through that, there are programs there you can earn college credit going there as well. And that's, the Eastern program has become so popular for us for the same reasons that students get a jump start, graduate with both a high school diploma and a certificate of completion. So again, and have skills, but also have the ability to go on for post-secondary training if that's what they want to do. And so it really does open up lots of doors. But really, I guess as a parent, looking at all the options.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. And someone else had also asked the question about what to do when neither positive or negative boundaries work. I think they were kind of talking about repercussions, like, or what's the word? What's the word with the R that you just said it earlier, Lizzie? Reinforcement, positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. I think that's what they're talking about. So, trying to come up with, as a consequence to something, whether it be, trying to be positive about it or being punitive or, kind of a negative consequence, that they're just not working. Any thoughts about when it just doesn't feel like consequences are working?
Yeah, I mean, I think like and I don't know what the person has tried, right? But I think a lot of times it helps really like get like writing everything out, like your expectations, like the terms of like negotiating social contracts, basically, right? Because like that's kind of what boundaries are. It's like a social contract with your kid. And a lot of times and this is a Patrick Dowling who's speaking later, but this is his term and he does a lot of family work. Like people are not upholding their social contract in the relationship, right? And so a lot of times I feel when people get to this place, they've tried a lot of different things and there's not been a lot of consistency and repetition and just like concise laying it all out, right? And a common thing we see a lot of times when people are like transitioning home from rehabs and stuff like that, because like kind of Dawn said, when they transition back to school, if you're transitioning out of rehab, that's a huge transition. They'll do like an actual physical written contract of like, these are like the guidelines and the rules that you need to abide by to live in this household and to be a member of this household. And so sometimes I think really being specific and clear and then being consistent, and just continuing to communicate through that, right? And just not kind of like turning a blind eye or pretending like it's not going on, or and learning how to be creative with it. You know what I mean? Every kid is different. When you guys were talking about the introvert thing, like I was thinking about that, right? Like learning how to connect and identify like what motivates a kid can vary. So you have your standard and typical things, but a lot of times if you kind of like explore and talk to the kid, you might find like the positive reinforcement thing that might work, right? But you got to kind of sit there and usually like probe a little bit. A lot of times they won't just like give you that right off the bat. Like all of this stuff takes like time and energy, which is why it's like really hard right now, because I think everybody is like hard pressed for time and energy, which gets back to like the modeling. Like it's like parenting is hard, like, and whatever stage you're in, it's hard. I have two toddlers. It's chaos at my house, and when I was talking to Kim about this program, I was talking about like how it starts then. It's like, my daughter's learning to walk. If every time she falls down, I freak out and go pick her up, she's going to learn that like every time she falls, that's bad and she needs to react. So it's so interesting. All of this stuff, it takes time, energy, awareness, focus, repetition. And so that's why I like give yourself a pat on the back if you showed up tonight, because you're doing the right thing, So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Thanks. And I'm thinking a lot about my kids are both Hatboro-Horsham alums. They're all grown up now. They're 30 and 33. But as I said earlier, I have a son who's in recovery from drug addiction. But my daughter, who does not struggle with substances, but she has a tremendous number of challenges with mental illness. So she's got depression and anxiety, Tourette syndrome, OCD, a lot of stuff that she has struggled with through the years. And they really, because if anyone knows anything about Tourette's, it really does peak in those like 13 years, 13, 14, 15, that just, could there be a worse time in anyone's life to have a challenge like that? And the OCD was a really big issue back then. She's managed a lot of that beautifully through years of really a lot of therapy and self-care. She's doing great, thank goodness. But especially back in those days in school, I know it was so hard. When I saw her struggling, I would, and I hear this from parents a lot, and I work with parents all the time now. I pick my battles, and I just wanted to put that out there. I think that's a boundary thing, right? Like, so if I'm picking my battles, that means I'm letting some things go that I probably know in my heart I shouldn't. Like, do I really want to bug her about doing this chore that she didn't do because she just had a horrible day and somebody was teasing her for her tics, So I'm going to give her a hard time. Well, this is her diagnosis. This is what her therapist had to say to me, is like, she has a diagnosis. She's going to have to learn to manage this. And it's going to be a hard road, but she's the one who's got to carry it and through her life, And so if you're making everything soft and throwing out the pillows and making it less challenging for her to have responsibilities, how's that going to work for her later? And it's such a hard thing for a parent. And then with my son, we didn't really become aware of his challenges with substance use until he was a senior in high school. It was happening earlier, but we were just really in the dark until it escalated. By the time it escalated and I could see his light kind of going out of his eyes and with his, progression into drug addiction, I was also picking my battles because my kid was in pain and he was not behaving in a way that was familiar to us. And so in both of these instances, I felt like I was going to add to their pain if I said, like, you got to make your bed. You've got to do this. You've got to be on time for that. And you said you were going to visit grandpa and you didn't. And, that kind of stuff, that I was letting it go because I saw them suffering. So I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about that, about how, I knew that I needed to make these things happen, kind of give them the latitude to fail. I know you guys all said it, and it is so true. We don't want to rob them of those growth opportunities, as hard as they are to watch. I don't know. I just wanted to put all that out there and see if anybody had anything they wanted to say.
I would say like one of the most natural things about being a parent, and I'll speak from my experience, like being a mother, is to want to like protect your kid. You know what I mean? So it's almost like as they develop, you have to work against that instinct, because when it overreaches, what ends up is we see these enabling patterns that then your boundaries, your rights and needs as a person begin to be violated because you're filled with anxiety and fear and you're walking on eggshells. And so it's really tough, but I always try to like think like life is tough. Life is beautiful and it's great, but life is tough, And so if kids don't get that lesson, you see a lot of things that are not pretty, like you see a lot of entitlement, narcissism, stuff like that, as an individual, right? Those aren't like appealing characteristics, but they come from somewhere. And so that's why like having boundaries and like not saving the kid, when the kid calls you and is like, I want to come home from school, I'm too anxious, right? And not immediately saving them is so important, because like you're setting them up for reality rather than setting them up for a reality that's just not the terms of life for anybody that's human. You know what I mean? And part of the most beautiful thing I think about being human is the struggle and is the suffering. And I always use this analogy in like my groups when I run substance abuse groups. I don't know if I have any basketball fans here, but in the NCAA tournament, right, every year there's always like one team that like upsets the whole bracket, and everybody ends up like rooting on this team that was like a complete underdog. Everybody likes the underdog, and the underdog usually comes from struggle and suffering and something that they overcame that you didn't think that they were able to overcome, right? And so like having that and allowing your kid to have that is probably one of the best things you can give them in life, despite it being really hard and challenging.
Thank you. Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, and that reminds me of something too that I heard when Anna was in middle school. She had a guidance counselor who, Dawn knows who I'm talking about, who I kind of cry every time I see him because he was so special to our family. When Anna was in the throes of the Tourette's and everything, and she was having a really bad day, and she was telling him that, there's this friend of mine who is so perfect. She's nice, she's pretty, she's smart, she's an athlete, and she's popular. And her locker was right down from my daughter's. And every time she saw her, this girl was like flooded with friends and like, oh, you're so special. And she's like, I just want to be her. And her guidance counselor said, yeah, we call those butterflies. Like everything looks great. And maybe it is, but I'm putting my money on you for the long run, and I don't know how much a 13-year-old or 14-year-old can really feel that it's going to be great when I'm 30. I'm going to have so much resilience, but it's true. It really is true. She can handle anything. She just applied to vet school. Everybody cross your fingers. I mean, she's launched. Her life is great, but it took a lot of work. But I think he was right that, she's, God bless those butterflies. I hope it's going to be okay when things get hard, when their life has been really smooth sailing, and whose life is perfectly smooth sailing. What she saw looked easy. It wasn't necessarily. That young lady could have had just as many problems that weren't on the surface. My daughters were on the surface with her tics and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think it's it's like, the gifts of desperation that come from people who are, who have alcoholism and other things, where they find connection. They find a program that helps them to carry them through their lives without self-destructing or continuing their self-destructive use. There are a lot of beautiful things that can come from the hard times. Go ahead, Dawn, were you going to say something?
Here's my mic works. How's my sound?
It's okay.
I think just that idea of resiliency, the ability to bounce back. Right now, everything that students are feeling is very uncomfortable. And the more we push students to push through, where they're saying, I'm stressed and I'm anxious, it's uncomfortable. Some of it is just learning how to deal with being uncomfortable. And it's like our challenge right now as professionals is determining, like, when is it just regular awkward challenge versus becoming a real, mental health need where there's need for additional treatment and such. So just being uncomfortable and working through it, pushing through, being resilient, those are skills that will carry through life and that we need to support. As uncomfortable as it is for everyone, it's the real challenge, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder if you guys, maybe Pam, if you have any thoughts too about these are just such different times. And, what's your advice for families who are just that fatigue, the compassion fatigue, the exhaustion? What are you seeing with your staff? I mean,
I think the big piece too is like talking about it and putting it out there, because we are all feeling it. It is funny because I did have a mom who I felt like she vented and vented and vented. We probably were on the phone for like 40 minutes, but then afterwards she was like, I feel much better. And when I said, well, I'm seeing the same attitude from your daughter at school, and I'm seeing, you know what I mean? Because I think parents are starting to feel like it's just them, and it's not. Okay. But we have to have a unified front. But I think it's the opportunity to talk. And then I do think there is a piece too, though, is like, you're venting and you talk about, but it's also nice to have people to just run ideas by and get, suggestions. And keep reminding yourself that, again, we're in it for the long haul. You know what I mean? Like, I think Lizzie was so right when she was making the comment that it doesn't happen overnight. And that's part of the problem too, because I'll get parents that'll say, well, I tried this yesterday and this the day before, but you keep changing up the game. You know what I mean? And we need to see some consistency, because that's where I think the students, they didn't know what to expect. We're trying to make it as real as possible. Some other things too, I wanted to say too, is I know a lot of students, again, feeling really awkward at school or feeling like they don't have the same friendships. Because again, there was a break in friendships and socializing and everything else. But also we can also be a resource in connecting students. Maybe it's not as much out that people are aware of, like clubs and activities and those kind of things, but those experiences are going on. And so we can also facilitate that too, of getting your child back in the game. And especially that there's some really nice clubs, Interact, Community Service, you know what I mean? Where again, they're very welcoming. But sometimes I think the students don't know, and especially the ones that have come up through the middle school, maybe just jumped right into high school at 10th grade, like they missed out on the opportunity of seeing, what was going on. It'll be interesting when we have our big red and black this year, and how many kids have missed that for a while. It's a big event for us. But again, utilize the supports, utilize school, because we can help with those things too. Because I think that, we always say that the students that are involved, whether it's an activity, club, sport, or whatever, again, I think feel better about themselves. They have more teeth in the game. So we can also help with that as well.
Thank you, Pam. That's great. So let's see. Someone said, thank you for hosting the session. It's great to see us holding these discussions between the school, families, and community partners. Oh, that's from Dr. Evelich. Thank you so much, Dr. Evelich. So we have a question. How do you approach change and adjustment during a pandemic with a child who is autistic?
So I would say, like, do you have good providers to help you with that, right? Because a child who's autistic has their own specific challenges. And so getting supports in place are going to be really important. Like I was working with a family, I was working with a mom, but her son was autistic. And when they switched to virtual school, it was like a nightmare, right? And he lost a lot of his supports at school, and he went to a really good school district where they worked really well with him. So they hired somebody to come in and do the virtual school with him, you know what I mean? And they got the school district to pay for it. So like really seeking out the resources and what's available is going to help, because I mean, the pandemic and adjustment and change is going to be hard for any kid. And then you add a mental health diagnosis that they specifically, that's a challenge already. Really having the adequate supports is going to be the way, I think, to kind of get through that. And that can look different depending on the situation. But I do know parents that advocate for themselves, they find the supports and the resources that are available.
Great. Thank you, Lizzie. Dawn, any thoughts about the families with special needs students?
Before my mic, sorry. As Lizzie said, each diagnosis can be so different. So it really depends on what type of supports you need. There are certainly community-based services. Often children with diagnosis have the ability to qualify for medical assistance, which can open up other resources in the community, like family-based, wraparound, where mental health supports can come into the home, or increased family supports. So there are different opportunities. There are different social skills groups outside of the community. Again, it depends. A lot of this stuff to play in insurance, though, right? Like what is available through insurance. There are some wait lists. So it's important to get your name out there. And if you're looking for supports, in the meantime, talking with the school, what supports are in place there, but getting on those wait lists. That is a challenge. And sometimes things can ebb and flow, and it seems okay right now, but when you're dealing with a wait list that's 6 months out, things can change. So hang on, it's worth checking it out. If there is something that is so so important at the time that you're deciding to go through the process, stick with it. It could be that connection where things are great right now, the ability to form a connection with somebody for you and your child, and then when something else comes up that you really need it and you're already connected. So it's a real barrier to have to make the phone calls and work through insurance, but sometimes it's what you need to do to get that added support in place. And again, sometimes schools can help with you knowing like what resources might be out there, what's available in your community. All of that depends on where you live.
And I hope that the parent has access to support from other parents as well, who have that same kind of shared experience. I think that is incredibly helpful.
I'll jump in. My 17-year-old actually is on the autistic spectrum, so I can appreciate this very much. And right now I'm in the throes of, for the second time, during this pandemic, have sought outside services. But I've also made sure to reach out again to caseworkers at school, to his guidance counselor at school. And I'm really just trying to rope in anybody that I can get, bite. And I know, because in one email I said, I don't care if it's a janitor that takes 10 minutes to listen to him, but can somebody find the time, to give an ear? Because I do think it's really stressful. And again, especially with a student that's on the spectrum, we're living day by day and things change. And so like this whole idea of what's consistent and, and your typical transitions, even in the day, are completely off. So I can appreciate that. But I can say again, it's like, casting your net wide and seeing what you can get. You keep going to every angle that you can. And sometimes that's also reaching out to your primary, physician and asking them. Turning over that insurance card, calling on the back there, mobile crisis. I mean, there's all these different things that you just keep trying to hit and say, where are people finding luck and getting services? Or have you heard, where there's openings, or who's good for this piece? It's difficult with the spectrum because, again, every kid is so different. And so it really does have to be specialized, but I can appreciate that and understand. And I feel you.
Absolutely. And I have a friend whose child has autism, and they're on a Facebook page, and there's even that kind of a thing can be, at least you feel like you have some support and you're not alone.
Absolutely.
I'm a cheerleader for those support groups. Someone said that, I love this. I'm sure that the staff on here appreciate this. I'm reminding kids that school staff are people, has been part of our conversation at home. And I think that's really important. That's a great thing, because I know that, kids kind of by nature are a little narcissistic. So it's a good idea to remind them that they're teachers and administrators and cafeteria staff and bus drivers. They're all people too, and trying to manage all of this stuff as well. Someone had a question. I think, Dawn, this would be best for you, perhaps. Do you have students that hold support groups in school with their peers?
So our groups are facilitated by our American counselor. We've gone back and that allows students to meet other students who may be going through similar situations. As a school, we're very cautious to put children in charge of other children's mental health, drug and alcohol concerns. They are not professionals, and that's really challenging. There are community organizations where children can be peer-to-peer supports, learn to do that training, but in a school setting, a child who's going through their own mental health or struggles that they have going on, a lot of times those are the kids who want to take on everybody else's stuff and help them out, so that they're also avoiding working on their own. So we do try to be cautious of letting that, students, number of times the kids that have come into my office who aren't dealing with their own stuff is because they're dealing with all their friends' stuff. It's sometimes like you need to recognize what you're avoiding. So again, really cautious to make sure kids are not putting on the stress of all of their friends and all of their peers. So again, that's why we do the facilitated groups, but it does give them an opportunity to work with other kids who may be going through similar situations. I will say we also have our link crew students at the high school who try to work with younger kids as mentors. But again, when we're looking at, more mental health type issues, we certainly want to engage adults in those situations.
Right. And I know we'll be talking a lot more about this in April when Mike Blanche is with us for the, for helping kids find that tech life balance. So I don't want to go too far down the road of technology, but it really can be a support, some of the group chats or different things, different ways for kids to feel that they have a connection, whether it's, just again, because it's so hard with the isolation right now, to feel connected. I think we can easily demonize technology, and there's plenty to unpack there, but it can be supportive for sure, at least to help them feel a little bit of camaraderie and around some different shared experiences. Folks, please feel free to ask us any other questions or comments that you might have. I know that there's so much to talk about with this. I'll keep rambling on about some of the things that I think a lot about with this stuff too, is that I realized that because I hear from so many parents who are, and because our organization is focused a lot on substance use, and as I said earlier, cannabis really has been a giant problem these days, but it is still second to alcohol use with kids. Alcohol is still the number one substance that most kids are using under 18. But what I find is there's such resistance. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but there's such resistance to engage the school district in planning for support. And I just wanted to reinforce this, that I know how much as a parent, we all want the school to view our child in a positive light. We really want them to like our kid, to write their letter of recommendation. But truly, I know this because I've worked so closely with school districts for many, many years. They truly want to be your child's advocate and ally, and they want to be there to support them. So I think sometimes, and it took me a while to admit this, I was pretty much one of the last people to truly understand what my son's struggles were with substances. I mentioned that he was 18 by the time we really understood that there was a problem. I was thinking that his last year he had senioritis. And it is hard to tell what is normal teenage behavior and what is maybe something problematic. And I was really and truly, I was the home and school parent at Simmons. I worked for the HHEF. I was very, very active. My daughter was in band, so I was all a band mom and all that kind of stuff. And my kids, were home a lot, and yet I still missed a lot of the stuff that was going on with my son. And I know that I know now that other people saw it before I did. And I think that we love to believe as parents that we know our child better than anyone. But the hard truth for me was that Yes, I know them really well, but I don't know everything about what's going on with them. So I just want to encourage parents to keep an open mind. It is not the end of the world when we recognize that there's some kind of red flag. This just means, and we do this a lot with our mock teen bedroom that we show, and I can see parents' faces when they start to recognize some signs of substance use with their kids. And I just want to say, like, do not be afraid to seek professional help if you get there. I think that is something too, with regard to boundaries, that we kind of, because there's so much stigma attached to this, we kind of want to keep it at home, deal with it there. Well, guess what? We're just not equipped for that. We're just not. Even if I knew then what I know now, what I do know now is I should seek help from somebody like Lizzie, like other counselors who really understand substance use, and not to be afraid to seek specialists' help like you would for any other medical condition or mental health condition that your child might be struggling with. You want to know, what should we be doing to get around this? And I know some parents have asked about cannabis and trust and worries and all that kind of stuff. Seek the help of somebody who understands this. For heaven's sake, just call me if you want to talk about it, because I've been there. But just to ask about resources and what's available. But please, please, please don't hesitate to partner with the school district, because they really and truly do have your kid's best interest at heart. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to judge your child. They see this a lot, and they're really well equipped to handle it. And to be helpful. So I see a comment here. Again, my kids have had $1 million education with Hatboro-Horsham School District. My son is autistic and daughter has pretty rough anxiety. I've had such support all the way through since kindergarten, because the faculty are real, compassionate, and very easy to talk to. Thank you for everything, truly. What a lovely comment. Thank you for that. And let's see, any other questions right now? Does anyone have any other, we have about 8 minutes left if you want to ask anything else. Any panelists have anything else that you'd like to say?
I'll jump in real quick. And I'm glad the parent who said about reminding your kid that staff, are people too. And that's the same thing. Like when we're looking at, like when you're worried about telling, faculty that your family's struggling or the student's struggling. Well, guess what? We're all parents for the most part too. And we all have situations. It's just like me saying that I can understand my son's on the spectrum. So I think sometimes when you do talk about things, these are things that also staff are, we're all people. But we choose this profession because we want to help. That's what we want to do. And that we've seen it a little bit more than the average bear. So, we can give you a better perspective and tell you what we see. But please feel like we really are here to work with you. And our ultimate goal is to get your son or daughter across that stage, to get that diploma, to be successful. And I say all the time to my kids, I'm your guidance counselor for life. So you go 2 years to the next level and you have some problem, pick up the phone and call. We're always a resource to the families in our community. And so at any point, if you need some help, let us know. But like Kim said, it's really important also just be open to the idea of supports in the community and what resources are out there too. You don't have to do this by yourself. Nobody has to.
Thank you, Pam. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share?
Hey, just to wrap up on the healthy boundaries thing, because you said, Kim, that kind of stuck with me, right? But you don't know what you don't know. And I don't pretend to know everything, right? But everybody that's in a certain profession, they specialize in things. So listening to the information at hand is really important. And so there's a lot of different ways for somebody to change. And if the client isn't motivated, we can change the family dynamic, and then that can change things too. And so kind of like what you were saying, Kim, like you didn't know, and then you were the last to kind of like figure it out. And then you had to get educated and seek support and do all these things. And what happens when the family system changes and the parents change and they change their boundaries and they change what they tolerate is then the person is pushed to change, honestly, because the tolerance in the family system is not there for the maladaptive behaviors or whatever's going on that's stressful and toxic to anybody else living in that household. So there's a lot of different ways to go about this. And it's not just the kid getting the help. A lot of times, especially with adolescents, my move is to get the parents into therapy, honestly, because like,
Absolutely.
if I can get the parents into therapy, this will start moving a lot faster and will be way more effective at the end result, which is really everybody being more healthy in the family system and loving and kind and generally treating each other in a way that's respectable. So I was just kind of like thinking that when you said all that, because a lot of times I don't think parents realize that, right? A lot of times when you put an adolescent in treatment, a lot of good treatment professionals will know, like, if we can get you help and support, this will be more successful.
Well, absolutely. And you have to change the foundation a little bit too, to give them not that I'm blaming parents for what goes, awry with our kids, but we did need to make some changes. We needed a lot of therapy as a family to learn how did our dynamics need to change. It's a lot of this is counterintuitive when you recognize that your child has some of these challenges, that you think you're supposed to become an expert on this stuff. I remember a parent saying to me, like, well, I guess I really need to start understanding about all the different drugs there are. I'm like, not necessarily. I'm hoping you're done with that. I'm hoping that you can now talk about like how things are going to look differently moving forward in a really good way, in a positive way. Yeah, thank you for that, Liz. That was a perfect way to kind of wrap up. And I also want to remind everybody that we have recorded this. So that link was for the follow-up page was /parents, conversation.zone/parents. And the recording will be there probably by tomorrow morning. It takes a little while to process and get it loaded onto YouTube, and then I'll have it loaded up there. So anyway, I want to really thank, first of all, I bow to you if you are a parent, if you are an educator, and if you are a therapist. And that's what we have with us tonight. So I have loads of admiration for all of you, and hopes for good health and wellness and togetherness really soon. So thank you all so very much for being here. I see a new comment. Oh, thanks, Bob, for putting in the link, conversation.zone/parents. That's where the follow-up recording will be. Also, contact information for Lizzie, for Pam, for I'll get Dawn's. I think Dawn's might be on there, but anyway, I'll make sure that all of our contact info is on there. Thank you all so much.
No, thank you for having us. This was great.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
I just want to say thanks to Hatboro-Horsham Educational Foundation for allowing us to continue to have these conversations. Sometimes they're a little, out of the box, but the opportunity to bring conversations like this. And thank you, Lizzie, for being a speaker with us, Pam, for joining our panel. This was a really great opportunity, and I think so important with everything that we have going on. And our families, and parents, guardians, all of you who made the time tonight to figure us out. Hopefully you took something away from it.
Yes. Yay, HHEF. Support your local education foundation. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.